He'll be joining us hopefully next week. Today, before we get started, I've had so many people call the office, and there's something that we need to fix. When I want to talk very briefly today about auto collisions, which I'm into 42 years I've been doing this, and lately I've just seen more and more of these cases go off the rail because for whatever reason, we have a massive amount of people that are not acquiring car insurance. That's right. When you register your car, you're required to have car insurance. But what has occurred is the people that we're seeing, about 80%, they have no car insurance or limited car insurance. And I want to talk to you about that and the problem that you're faced with. First, our state law requires that you have liability coverage, but the state law minimum is only $25,000. A $25,000 policy won't pay adequately the typical damage claim. The second thing is that because so many people don't have car insurance, it's an imperative that you have adequate coverage. And you need to shop around and not try to get the cheapest type coverage. Get what you can afford, but make sure it's at least $100,000, $300,000. And because if you were to be involved with an accident, the most important coverage you can have now, other than liability, is uninsured motorists or underinsured motorists. The uninsured motorist coverage and auto policy give you protection if you in a collision with a person who don't have insurance. Folks, over 30% of the drivers in our county now do not carry liability insurance, about 30%. So that means that there's a good probability that if you're involved in a collision, that the other person would not have insurance coverage. So make sure that you have adequate coverage. Now, the next aspect about that is that you have these collisions. Because interest rates have went up, the cost of buying a car was also increased because of the interest factors. In other words, the interest is creeping up again, and that means that when people buy cars on installment sales, they're going to be upside down. In other words, that the equity in the car will be dissipated, and so you're going to owe more money on the car than what your balance is owed on the debt. So if you buy a car, say for $30,000, and you have a 12% interest, it's not going to amortize or be reduced according to the value of the car. So your car value is going to be less than what you owe. And so a lot of these dealerships are selling people what is called gap insurance coverage. Now, when they sell the gap insurance, that tack on another $1,500 to $2,000, which makes your payments even higher. So the key, though, first is to make sure you shop and do a computer analysis on the car purchase to make sure you get a car at the lowest possible purchase price. Second is make sure that you get the best interest rate. Try to shop around for interest rate because right now it's killing a lot of folks. Now, but if you're involved in accidents, this is other things that are very important, that one, you should not give statements to admit fault. The second thing is that you should get good photographs. Get photographs of the scene, of the parties, of the vehicles. And when you take photographs, take them from about 15 feet away from each angle, north, south, east, and west. And if somebody have skid marks or pavement indentation, take pictures of those far off and also close up. And because you have to take them according to the direction. So start at the north, go north, south, east, west, so you know the angle in which the photographs were taken. I'm saying that real fast, but the point is that you need to have photographs from different directions. And we use that evidence a lot of times to establish fault. The next thing is always get whatever witness is, get their name, their address, their cell phone, their work number, their email address. And always get witnesses' information and don't rely on the police officer, because right now, I got a confession, they're doing a terrible job in terms of collecting witness statements, the worst I've ever seen. So in the net result, you got to be more proactive in order to collect evidence to protect your right. And then the other thing, also get a copy of their registration and their car insurance. Take a photograph of it with your cell phone. And finally, make sure you take pictures of the other car's license plate, and so you make sure you got the right person. So that's the nutshell of what I think you should do in terms of car crash. And I don't want to go into this whole show, but make sure you do those things. The second thing that I'm disturbed about is jury duty. It's imperative if you get a subpoena to appear for jury duty that you show up. Too many folks in our community aren't showing up for jury duty. We had less than 10% of our folks show up for the primary election this year, and we're having a lower turnout for folks for jury duty. And because most people do not fully understand or appreciate the importance of showing up for jury duty. It's most important for people in our community because you need to have folks that look like you if you're sitting in judgment for damages in a car accident or something, or if you have a criminal case, you want to have somebody objective and fair like you are. And finally, don't forget, we have an important election coming up this year. Make sure you're registered and vote in November, because we have so many crazy things going on with these extreme Republicans now are trying to take away our rights. And they start off with the women's right, but our rights could be abrogated also. So make sure that you go vote and this fall. Now, having said that, Attorney Banks, how you doing today? Okay.
I'm doing well, Attorney Lee. Thank you.
So you just came back from the National Bar Convention. Care to give us a live report?
Absolutely. I returned yesterday from the 97th Annual National Bar Association convention in Memphis, Tennessee. And this was the first time that we gathered in person in 2 years. And so the National Bar Association is the oldest and largest national association of predominantly African-American judges, lawyers, law students, and law professors in the world. And over the course of a week, we addressed legal issues impacting our communities, including voting rights, election protection, and the right to reproductive health care. We celebrated National Bar Association member Fred Gray, who represented Rosa Parks as a young attorney. He represented Rosa Parks, Dr. King Jr., John Lewis, and other civil rights activists. And he still practices law today. In fact, he recently filed a election protection lawsuit. And at 91 years old, he still goes to his office every single day. He also represented the survivors of the Tuskegee experiment and won the highest settlement, multi-million dollar settlement at that time. Recently, on July 7th, President Biden honored him and presented him with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest civilian award in our nation. The National Bar Association, during our convention, discussed several issues of importance to our African American communities, including reparations and HR 40, and the fact that the time for reparations is now. A bill has been introduced, HR 40, which would simply establish a commission to study reparations. And so it is our hope that that bill will ultimately be passed. It's been passed in the House, and of course, as you know, everything stalls in the Senate. Another topic of intense discussion was why Black prosecutors matter. and we had several prosecutors participate in that conversation. Let me stop there.
Well, we're proud to say that in Indiana, we made history. We have 2 Black prosecutors or U.S. attorneys for the state of Indiana. In the history of our nation, we had never had any Black U.S. attorney be the head guy in these offices in Northern and Southern District, and now we have 2. And we're bringing into Indianapolis at the end of August a person responsible, Cedric Richmond from the White House. And so at the end of August, I think the 26th of August, we're going to have a community forum featuring Cedric Richmond at Olivet, and that should be posted probably next week. And so we invite you, but we're going to set up a process where you have to RSVP for that event. Now, the other issue, though, is that we still have this issue about these runaway shootings and things like that. And what I've been most concerned about is that there's uptick in violence. And what has happened to that massive shooting in your neighborhood up there in Illinois? Is there any additional information on that issue?
Well, Attorney Lee, one thing that has occurred in the aftermath of the tragic mass shooting in Highland Park on Independence Day was that, as you know, the shooter has been charged with 7 counts of first-degree murder, and numerous additional counts are anticipated still to follow. Also, several grants have been made to assist small businesses and to provide them with assistance. Those businesses that were closed down in the aftermath of the shooting. So there's small business assistance available to small businesses that were impacted as a result of the shooting. And then also, as you know, at a national level, a few weeks ago, the bipartisan Keep Our Children Safe Act, or HR 7910, was passed. And that amends the U.S. law that will provide for an increased age from 18 to age 21 on the purchase of certain firearms, such as, of course, semi-automatic rifles. It would also prevent gun trafficking and modernize the prohibition on untraceable, or what is known as ghost firearms, and will encourage the safe storage of firearms, as well as provide an incentive for states to enact red flag laws. And then just yesterday, on the House side, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the Assault Weapons Ban Act, which will prohibit the sale, manufacture, transfer of semi-automatic assault weapons and large capacity ammunition devices. We know that the bipartisan act that was passed, the bipartisan Keep Our Children Safe Act that was passed, was a first step. And the second piece, the Assault Weapon Ban Act, is sorely needed to regulate these weapons of mass destruction that have no place in our communities. This law would also update the definition of a semi-automatic weapon under a federal law, and it will require that semi-automatic assault weapons be securely stored. There is a provision in this law that would protect the rights of hunters and gun collectors, because this is not about the Second Amendment right in the Constitution. I can't imagine that our forefounders contemplated weapons of mass destruction and weapons of war when they considered the Second Amendment. The House passed the Assault Weapons Ban Act by a vote of 2017 to 2013. The legislation will go to the Senate. As you know, the Senate has failed to act on so many pieces of legislation that are needed to provide safe and secure communities.
Yeah, that's very good. A little typo was 217 to 213. There's 435 members of Congress, but there was there were some other interesting bills that passed, and we had Pierre on the line. Pierre, you had a question or comment for us? Okay, you can't log on. Okay, but they passed this Respect for Marriage Act, and because of the verbiage in Clarence Thomas' opinion when they basically said that Roe versus Wade was no longer the law of the land, he also encouraged people to file suit on the gay marriage, in other words, so the House passed a bill to protect that particular section of our national economy. And then also they had a bill to protect abortion and another one for contraceptive. And it was kind of interesting because most people don't realize that the laws in different states are becoming so extreme in terms of dealing with the relationship between husband and wife and families. And eventually those rights that they're legislating are more akin to what you do in totalitarian regimes such as Russia and places like that. Because one of the pinnacles of America is that we have freedom of choice. We have certain rights that's guaranteed by our Constitution. Well, these legislation, they're so extreme now until it results in the eradication of those rights that we've enjoyed our entire life. And we see more and more of these laws that are popping up throughout the country. And the bottom line is that this election this fall going to be most critical, particularly in the congressional and senatorial races nationally. Without that, we will see a rapid deterioration of rights that we've enjoyed. And we won't see, if a Republican take control of the House or the Senate, we're going to see stalled legislation for the next 2 years because they're seeking to gain power to expense. Now, one of the things that we didn't talk about was the January 6th hearing. Attorney Banks, this January 6th matter is really exploding now. I gotta believe that the 45th president is sleeping a little bit uneasy now because everybody in the inner circle now seem to be ratting him out. They had all these people working for him, and now they're coming forward telling all types of tales and things that happened, just unbelievable. We have this big issue involving fake electors in the attempt to overthrow the federal government. We have the unusual pressure being placed upon the vice president. They had a revelation that the president basically ordered a hit on the vice president with the mob. And so where are we going with this? Do you think that eventually it's going to end in an indictment of the former president?
Well, I'm not sure because this is a very, of course, serious matter, and one in which, as you know, President Ford ultimately pardoned President Nixon. This potential issue can be very, very disunifying, if that's a word, of our entire nation. But let me just say that the evidence, as you mentioned, is stark. And most of us who watched the January 6th attempted insurrection, an overthrow of our government, understand, what occurred that day, that our former president sought to overturn the 2020 presidential election after he lost that election. And Attorney Lee, you've often spoken, of the specific numbers by which, and hopefully you'll repeat those again today, by which he lost the election. He knew ahead of time that January 6th could turn violent, but yet he chose not to act when his supporters attacked the Capitol and put the lives of all of the members of Congress and Vice President Pence at risk that day. We've seen how state election officials, they testified to the incredible harassment and pressure that was placed on them, death threats. And so from what I understand, this week it is very possible that President Trump and or President Pence could well be subpoenaed to testify before the committee.
In essence, let's give a recap. And I don't like to keep rehashing this, but in the president election, President Joe Biden received like 81.4 million votes in that ballpark. And Donald Trump received about 74.2 million votes. So President Biden received 7 million more popular votes. So the popular vote was a substantial margin. The Electoral College, I think, is a dated system of electing a president, but President Biden received 306 and Donald Trump received 232. In order to win, you need to have 270. And so President Biden with 36 electoral votes over the minimum amount to win the presidential race. But here's the problem. So they developed this strategy to attempt to have fake electors in states such as Georgia, Arizona, and states like that. And so their goal was to flip 36 or 37 electoral votes to Trump. Even though he lost a popular vote in those states, you had lawyers that was dumb enough, I just couldn't believe this, to say fake electors. We're going to send fake electors and then so have somebody object, and then they send it back to the state, and then we will then substitute the real elector for these fake winners. So in other words, despite the fact you lose a popular vote in a state, in these electoral college required that those votes go to the winning person in that state, this basic government 101. They decided that the loser would get the electoral votes in Arizona and Georgia and states like that until they make up this 37 vote deficit. In America, you would think that we would never do anything so outrageous. That's this type of stuff that goes on in Banana Republic. But yet, the President of the United States, Commander-in-Chief, led the charge to overthrow the federal government. It was the most ridiculous thing. And so they've had numerous people being prosecuted. We have these January 6th hearings that have been very illuminating. And I've watched some of the hearings because it's on every night for a while in the replay. And the people that they were calling were Republicans. These folks were all Trump loyalists who were saying these terrible things that he had done. Like, for example, when they were saying hang Mike Pence, he thought that he deserved it. Or he had the phone conversation with the Kevin McCarthy, and that was very revealing. And now they got absent-minded about what happened. So it's a terrible thing that happened in American history, and hopefully that we don't see that repeat itself. And we hope that the people that did wrongdoing is brought to justice, no matter who they are. But like Attorney Banks said, we don't know, because it seems like in this process, my biggest surprise was that Fannie Willis in Atlanta seemed to be aggressively pursuing it, whereas the district attorney in New York, African American, did a horrible job. He dropped all charges despite overwhelming evidence against Donald Trump. And I was wondering what would be the motivation, but in order to be prosecutor, I guess you have to raise a lot of money, and who knows, maybe some donor, somebody convinced them, but that was one of the worst decisions I've ever seen. What are your thoughts, Attorney Banks?
Well, over 800 people have been arrested and charged, and the search for others that were engaged in the insurrection attempt on January 6th are still being sought. But we do know that one participant, Guy Riffett, was convicted by a jury back in March, and his sentencing is scheduled for August 1st. And this may, in fact, result in the longest prison term. So far, the prison terms have the medium. We've seen 5-year prison terms, but the medium has been 30 to 45 days, and some have not resulted in any prison time at all, depending on the offense. But we are looking at a potential sentencing. Prosecutors have asked for 15 years, and the defense has asked for 2 years, with 1 year already having been served of one participant. And we're anticipating that sentencing hearing will take place, or that sentencing, I'm sorry, will take place on August 1st.
Well, also a reminder to our audience, our call-in number has been changed to 833-653-3529. That's 833-653-3529. The acronym is 833 in Lee Law. So we got it to match up so it'd be easy to remember. 833 in Lee Law. But in any event.
And Attorney Lee?
Yes.
I wanted to follow up on some comments you made earlier regarding the obligation to serve on a jury when you're called. From my perspective, a citizen's two fundamental duties are: one, the fundamental right to vote, and why it's important to vote in every election, not only presidential elections, but for every election, your local and state elections up and down the ballot, your primary elections as well as important to know who your judges are, many of which are selected through the election process. It's just critical that when you are requested or receive a notice to serve on a jury, that you do so, because diverse juries matter. And we know when we see that, constitutionally, citizens are entitled to a jury of their peers. Even one, and Attorney Lee can attest to this, even one African American juror can level the playing field in a jury trial, and provide, because of their perspective and their frame of reference and their diverse point of view, help to ensure that an accused is entitled and receives a fair jury trial. We know that diverse attorneys matter in our American judicial system. We know that diverse judges matter, and we also know that diverse juries matter. What do you think, attorneys?
Well,
Lee?
in my personal experience, I've had one African American who saved one of my trials. I've found out that we had a white supremacist on the jury pool that I couldn't get off because I ran out of strike. And he, no matter what evidence we put on, he would never go on to award any damages to an African American person. And so you don't see a lot of that, but it does occur because there are some people that have bias. And by the way, everyone have bias from time to time. We all have some type of bias. And so when you're doing the jury process, you try to eliminate the people that have bias that they can overcome. And during the course of jury selection, you only get a few minutes to talk to a person. And a lot of times people come to the courtroom with agendas. Now, the typical African American I've seen, when they come there, they just come there to do a good job. And that's in general for most jurors, but then there's some that show up, some other folks, but I've had some, like some white supremacists that showed up on some of the jury panels, and they disguise their bigotry, and then the judge asks them a simple question, they'll say something. When you follow up on it, then you're able to get some reason for their removal. But even when I had a jury admit that he had implicit bias, against African American, the judge did not excuse them. And because I had a couple jurors say that, we had to use our strikes to get rid of them. And it left me with one hardcore bigot in the jury pool that I couldn't get rid of. And I had African American clients. And so luckily we had one African American strong juror that said, no, we're going to be fair to everybody. And so you have to have that. And that's why it's important and imperative that you show up for jury duty. Because believe it or not, Marion County is probably about 40% or more minority, or maybe 45% now, but you're never going to have that type of minority representation with Hispanic and Asian and people like that. African American, like 28%. Then you have Hispanic, you have Asians, you have a lot of different demographics, but you don't see that in the jury pool. Why? Because one, they don't show up. But number two, they changed the process here locally to start doing driver's license, and that expanded the jury pool greatly. And we have really good jurors. When I first started practicing law, the weakness in our process is that we use property owners primarily as a source of jury members. And so my early career, when we were doing jury trials, I would get very few, if any, African Americans on the jury panel. That's because they use property ownership as the criteria, which is a bad idea. And so when they changed it to driver's license, it gave us a lot more diversity. And that's very important that you realize that. And then early on, when it first started, we had a greater turnout of African American. And then now it's hard because we're just not showing up like we should. And so the point I'm making is that make sure if you get a notice to appear for jury duty, make sure you contact them. Now, in the rare situation, if you had a pre-planned vacation you paid for, you can always reschedule it for the next week or the week after that. And also remember that you get paid a fee to serve on jury duty. They pay you, it's not free. And fourth, your employer, if you get a subpoena for jury duty, if they take action against you, they could be prosecuted. And so jury duty is an important thing, and they protected your rights to serve. And we're very fortunate here. Courts will come out very strong against your employee if they try to deny you the right to serve on jury duty. Now, having said that, equally important is that you also go vote, like Attorney Banks were talking about earlier. These rights, serving on jury duty is paramount, but equally the right to vote is also important. Don't take that for granted, because we have a big election coming up in November. And I need to start talking about this now because early voting in our city starts in October. So in about 45 days or so, April. Yeah, we'll be able to do early voting probably, in the next 60 days at least. So don't forget that. So make sure that you vote early and get your friends and neighbors to vote early. Let's see, can we get a better turnout than we did before. Now, the other thing, though, Attorney Banks, that I'm concerned about, other than voting, is that these extremists that are enacting laws that appears to be abrogation of the rights of women all over the country. In these Republican-controlled state, we see state after state adopting these laws that abrogates or eliminates rights of women. See, a lot of people don't realize this. Women were allowed to vote, I think, in 1921. So it's only been 101 years since women had the right to vote. African American, although we were given the right to vote as a result of the Civil War and legislation, but we didn't really have the right to vote because they end up enacting the Black Code and they restricted our access to vote by having poll taxes and all sorts of things that prevented our participation. Now we have the right to vote, and they're putting barriers like restricting the number of days you could do early voting. They restrict the number of voting sites. I'm glad to report here in Marion County, you can now vote at any voting site because it's computerized. You know, you see one near your house, you go vote there, even though you may not live in that district, they pull your name up and you're properly registered, you can vote. So we made it a lot easier here in Marion County. So you have no excuse whatsoever not to vote now. And so make sure that you exercise that right because it's very important. Now, in Chicago, Attorney Banks, what was the voter turnout this year in your elections?
It was low, as usual. And again, we can only emphasize and re-emphasize the importance of African Americans and everyone to vote in every single election. We cannot afford to be complacent or wearied, whether or not we have volunteers, for example, providing, water and snacks. Bring your own water, bring your own snacks. We have to do everything that we can to ensure that we vote in every election, and particularly this upcoming November election. We know that Illinois has very favorable laws that support our right to vote. We have same-day registration, we have drop boxes, we have early voting, but we know that there's been a proliferation of anti-voting legislation passed all across this nation. And so we just have to ensure and emphasize that we vote as if our lives depended on it, because they truly do. And we're also seeing, as Attorney Lee referenced, and Illinois is a state that honors and protects the right to reproductive health and the right for women to make decisions regarding their own bodies. And Illinois has made it very clear that other states that have passed these draconian laws that frankly take us back to the dark ages, that they welcome women from other states that are seeking reproductive health care. And also, Attorney Lee, I have read, and thank you for providing us with information regarding Indiana, which recently has lifted several injunctions on abortion-related laws in your state. And I was hoping that you could share with us the state of abortion rights in Indiana.
Well, it's a good thing. There was one thing I want to share about women's rights. one of the things that's been broadcast is that the extremists are adopting the term Christian nationalists. And when I saw that, I started doing some investigation to find out what the hell is a Christian nationalist, because there's no such thing, it doesn't make sense. So I looked at the history of that, and the Christian nationalist, the person who did that, the guy that ran for president, the idea was, you want to have racial purity and things like that. The person who advocated that back in the 30s and 40s, it had to do with racial separation and things like that. And then now, there was a recent guy, Reverend Jonathan Shelley, and he was talking about women's rights. And I'll play a little bit of this. It's just incredible what they're saying in terms of the rights of women. And in other words,
when it comes to
here's what he said.
Phrase women's rights, I usually object because I think of it from an American perspective. However, I do believe that women should have some rights. The question is not whether or not women have rights or not, but what are those rights?
Because women need someone like you to tell them what rights they should have.
In American culture, women are trying to become men in the rights category and have all the same quote unquote rights.
Well, yes, because people like you believe that you should be able to keep your foot on a woman at all times.
What would those rights be? Like voting. I personally don't think women should be able to vote.
Because women having their own opinions.
So the point I'm making is that
I don't think women should.
these extremists, a lot of people don't realize this, it's a lot deeper than what you think they are. These extreme positions are so far out of the norm until the right to vote become more important. So we'll take one caller from the show now. You have a question or comment for us, caller? Mr. Williams?
Yes. Mr. Lee, we should not take this reversal of Roe versus Wade lightly. Because we have a lot of laws that has been passed give us the benefit of rights also. If they are able to reverse a law that have been on years, they can also go back to the books and the education laws and the other benefits that the black man have enjoyed over the years. It's not to say that we need a law to make us equal. We are equal with everybody. We really didn't need a law, but the way that society has set up, we needed to bring things into equality and the purity into place. If we don't get together and go to the polls in great numbers, not like the dismal amount of people that went to the poll in the last election. That we got to get together, and if we have to have lines 5 miles long, we should be standing in the cold or rain or whatever elements there is and waiting to vote. We got to do that. We got to come into the unity, find out the best people that will represent us in the office, and go to the polls and vote for those people. We got to do it.
Well, I agree with you, Mr. William. We have to make sure, and we have to each take a personal role in that process, make sure our friends and our neighbors, our relatives all show up at the poll to vote. We have some important local election coming this fall. Like, for example, in the Marion County prosecutor's race, we have the best prosecutor we ever had, in my opinion, at least since I've been a lawyer, and who dismissed charges against all the African Americans that were in jail for marijuana. The people that were protesting, that got arrested, the 48 people dropped those charges because he felt that they didn't do anything wrong. A lot of people didn't realize when we had the summer riots, what occurred. We had some white supremacists that went and broke in building, and it looked like that they were done by these African Americans, but the cameras don't lie and showed who they were. So we have to make sure, Mr. Williams, that our folks get out and vote, because we have a candidate running for prosecutor now who had never been in a courtroom, it appears, and is running for prosecutor. The Republican put somebody up, and who are they trying to prosecute with her? I don't know, but I like the fact that we have somebody I know is fair and objective and doing the right thing for the people in our community. And I think that's more important. So in order to keep this person in office, we have to make sure our people get out and vote. Ms. Williams?
Mr. Williams stated it.
We also have to have the people that know the people and let them know that this, like you just made the statement that this person have never been in a court. If a person never have been in a courtroom, how can he run for the office of prosecutor? And he have no knowledge of the office. He have no knowledge of the process. He have no knowledge of how to deal with the people. How can he run for an office, and more than likely, he will be the one to get elected?
Well, no,
It's just like having Trump in the office all over. I shouldn't have said that, but it's just like having Trump in the office as president all over again.
well, as a woman, it's a Latino woman who, if you check her record out, she had done 3 cases, and one was a grand jury, no indictment, administrative, and in other words, no real experience. Doesn't have a clue how the prosecutor's office works, and the prosecutor's office is a trial lawyer firm. Meanwhile, the person, the prosecutor, done thousands of cases, and so in other words, they put somebody up to run. They're giving her a lot of money, and with no experience, nothing good could come out of that with somebody who is a completely empty slate coming to run a trial lawyer's firm. It's insulting, quite frankly. But most people don't know that because they see somebody on TV and they say, oh, this person may be great. Wrong. This person be bad for our community.
And that is why it's so important that we get this message out, and we start now through our churches, our community service organizations, through our civic and civil rights organizations, through our barber shops and beauty shops. We've got to get this message down to our people. And also we have to support our candidates as well. Whether it's $1, whether it's $5, whatever it is that you can contribute to these campaigns is very, very helpful. Because Mr. Williams stated it so eloquently, with respect to Roe versus Wade, where longstanding precedent that has been relied on for many, many, many years was overturned by this Dobbs decision. The same rationale can be used as well. Judge Thomas articulated in his concurring opinion that he wants to take a look at same-sex marriage, at contraceptives. And he didn't mention interracial marriage because under the rationale in the Dobbs decision, his marriage would be illegal. Mr. Williams stated that the right to education, the Brown versus Board of Education decision under this rationale in Dobbs could be threatened. So this is potentially an all-out assault on human and constitutional rights in our nation. And so if we, the people, and I share this on a one-on-one basis with everybody that I talk to, if we, the people, and that's African-American people, poor people, Asian American people, Hispanic, if the people came together, united, then we have an opportunity to preserve our democracy in this nation.
Well, thank you very much, Attorney. Yeah, and thank you very much for our callers for calling in today. I'd like to thank you, the audience, for listening and supporting our show each week. And don't forget that we have a call-in number that we've changed is 1-833-IN-LEE-LAW. And for future references, because we get better clarity when you call in on that line. And also, I'd like to thank our host, Dr. Smith, who does a great job for us. and you, the public, for supporting us. And we'll be broadcasting next Saturday with another entry that important to our community. And thank you again. And God bless and keep you. Take care.
Thank you for having me.